Welcome to Beneath the Storm, where lives collide in the most unexpected way. Ethan, a successful businessman, is living in the shadow of his past grief, struggling to help his ailing son, Sam. One stormy night, fate brings Maddie, a homeless woman with her own haunting past, into their lives. She's searching for her lost brother, but as she steps into Ethan's world, she becomes more than just a stranger. She is the key to Sam's healing. But as secrets unravel and trust is tested, nothing is as simple as it seems. Curious about what happens next? Make sure to subscribe, like, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the twists and turns of this emotional journey. Tell us in the comments, what would you do if a stranger entered your life and changed everything? Ethan Reeves sat in the back of his sleek black sedan, watching the rain pelt the windshield in sheets. The city lights blurred as they passed, casting an eerie glow over the darkened streets. Inside the car it was quiet, save for the rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers. The silence suited Ethan. He had come to accept it as part of his life, ever since his wife Anna had passed away. But the silence wasn't the worst of it. It was the emptiness that ate at him, the kind of hollow feeling that no amount of money or success could fill. Ethan had built an empire, a real estate conglomerate that spanned several states. His name commanded respect in every business circle. Yet, at night, when the world quieted down, it was the same unbearable emptiness that greeted him. His son Sam was all he had left now.
Sam was only 8, but had been dealt a cruel hand, suffering from a chronic illness that left him weak, withdrawn, and terrified of the world around him.
Every specialist Ethan had consulted had offered the same vague assurances, but none could promise a cure. Ethan's wealth could buy the best doctors and the finest treatments, but it couldn't restore Sam's childhood. Sir Marcus, Ethan's driver, spoke softly, breaking the silence. Ethan blinked, drawn out of his thoughts.
"What is it?"
"There's someone in the road," Marcus said, slowing the car. Ethan leaned forward, peering through the rain-slicked windshield. At first, the figure was just a shadow, barely discernible in the storm. But as the headlights illuminated the street, the silhouette became clearer. A young woman, soaked to the bone, cradling a small, crying child.
"Pull over,"
Ethan said, his voice sharper than he intended.
"Sir, it's not safe,"
Marcus began, but Ethan had already unbuckled his seatbelt. Without waiting for the car to stop completely, Ethan opened the door and stepped into the downpour. The cold rain hit him like icy needles, drenching him in seconds, but he barely noticed. His focus was on the woman, shielding the child with her body, her long, dark hair plastered to her face.
"What are you doing out here?"
Ethan asked, his voice loud enough to cut through the storm. The woman looked up, startled, her eyes wide and wary.
"He was lost,"
she said, her voice small, trembling. "I found him alone in an alley. I didn't know where else to take him." Up close, Ethan could see how young she was, barely in her 20s, with worn clothes that clung to her slight frame. The child, no older than 5, clung to her side, sobbing into her shoulder.
"Where are his parents?"
Ethan asked, scanning the empty street.
"I don't know,"
she replied, her voice cracking. "I've been walking around for hours, but no one seems to care.
Has scared, and I—"
The child let out another wail, cutting her off. She stroked his hair, murmuring soothing words, but it was clear the boy was inconsolable. Ethan felt something stir in him, a pang of empathy he hadn't expected. Something about the way the young woman held the child reminded him of Anna, how she used to cradle Sam when he was scared, whispering words of comfort only a mother could give.
"Come with me,"
Ethan said, surprising himself as much as her. When she hesitated, he added, "It'll help you both. Just come out of the rain." The woman's eyes searched his, uncertainty flashing in them. But the child shivered in her arms, and after a moment, she nodded.
"Thank you,"
she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. Maddie Harper couldn't believe what was happening. One moment she was wandering through the city, drenched and lost, trying to help a child she didn't even know, and the next she was sitting in the back of a luxury car, heading to a mansion that looked like something out of a movie. The warmth of the car felt strange after hours in the cold rain. She glanced at the man beside her, Ethan Reeves. He had introduced himself. He was clearly someone important. His suit, his car, his commanding presence, everything about him screamed wealth and power. Maddie felt painfully out of place, her own clothes soaked and tattered, her hands trembling from more than just the cold. The little boy in her arms, Benji, had finally stopped crying, but his grip on her was still tight. She had found him wandering near the alley where she sometimes slept, crying for his mother. Maddie didn't know why she had felt the need to help him, but something about his fear had struck a chord deep within her. "Where are you taking us?" she asked quietly, glancing out the window as they passed through tall iron gates. "My home," Ethan replied, his voice even. "You can stay there until we figure out what to do about the boy." Maddie's heart skipped a beat. His home. The man's mansion came into view, looming large and imposing against the dark sky. It was the kind of place she'd only ever seen in magazines: gleaming windows, perfectly manicured lawns, everything pristine and untouched by the kind of struggle she knew all too well. As the car came to a stop, Maddie hesitated, unsure if she should follow him inside. This wasn't her world. She didn't belong here. "You're safe," Ethan said, as if sensing her hesitation. "Both of you." Maddie swallowed hard and nodded. She followed Ethan out of the car, carrying Benji, who was now asleep in her arms. The housekeeper, Rachel, opened the door for them, her eyes widening in surprise at the sight of Maddie and the boy. "Who is this?" Rachel asked, her tone cool and assessing. "Her name is Maddie," Ethan answered before Maddie could speak. "She helped the boy. They'll be staying here for the night." Rachel's gaze lingered on Maddie for a moment, but she nodded and stepped aside. Maddie followed Ethan into the grand foyer, feeling even more out of place inside the opulent mansion. The marble floors gleamed beneath her feet, and the chandelier above cast a warm glow over the space. "This way," Ethan said, leading her up a sweeping staircase. He opened the door to a small guest room, a stark contrast to the grandeur of the rest of the house, but still far more luxurious than anything Maddie had ever known. He set down some towels and gestured to the bathroom. "Take your time," he said. "There are fresh clothes in the closet. We'll talk in the morning." Maddie nodded, grateful but overwhelmed. As Ethan left the room, she finally exhaled, feeling the weight of the night settle on her. She set Benji down on the bed, covering him with the soft comforter before heading to the bathroom. As the hot water washed away the cold and grime of the night, Maddie's mind raced. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long time she felt a glimmer of hope. A fragile, fleeting hope that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. The next morning, Maddie woke to the soft sound of birds chirping outside the window. For a brief moment she didn't recognize where she was. The plush bed, the clean white sheets, it all felt so foreign. Then the events of the previous night came rushing back. She turned to find Benji still sleeping soundly, his small form curled up under the blankets. Maddie's heart twisted. She didn't know what was going to happen with him, but she hoped someone would come looking for him soon. A soft knock on the door startled her. Maddie sat up as the door creaked open, and Rachel stepped inside, carrying a tray of food. "Mr. Reeves thought you might be hungry," Rachel said, her tone polite but distant. "Thank you," Maddie replied, though she could feel the coolness in Rachel's demeanor. The woman hadn't trusted her from the start. Maddie could see it in her eyes. Rachel set the tray down and glanced at Benji. "Is the boy awake?" "Not yet," Maddie answered, brushing a strand of hair away from his face. Rachel pursed her lips. "Mr. Reeves asked me to take him to the guest room down the hall. It's more appropriate for a child." Maddie tensed. "I can take care of him." Rachel's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Of course. But we have staff to handle that sort of thing here." Maddie didn't argue. She knew what Rachel was really saying, that she didn't belong here, and Maddie couldn't help but agree. As Rachel left with Benji, Maddie sat on the edge of the bed, her appetite gone. She had no idea how long she'd be allowed to stay here, or if Ethan even trusted her at all. She had to tread carefully. But more than that, she needed to find out where her brother Jake was. Maybe, just maybe, this strange turn of events could lead her one step closer to him. Ethan watched from his office window as Maddie played with Sam in the garden. It had been 2 weeks since she'd arrived, and in that short time, Sam had made more progress than he had in months. He laughed more, seemed less anxious, and even his physical therapy sessions went smoother with Maddie there. But Ethan couldn't ignore the nagging voice in the back of his mind. Rachel had been dropping subtle hints, suggesting that Maddie wasn't as innocent as she seemed. Ethan had dismissed them at first, but the doubts were beginning to creep in. He didn't want to distrust her. God knew she'd been nothing but good for Sam. But he couldn't afford to take risks, not when it came to his son. That evening, after everyone had gone to bed, Ethan made a decision. He installed a small camera in Sam's room, not to spy on Maddie, he told himself, but to make sure there was nothing out of the ordinary. For the next few nights, Ethan watched the footage. At first, everything seemed normal. Maddie would sit by Sam's bedside, telling him stories until he fell asleep. Her stories weren't the usual fairy tales, but rather pieces of her own life, how she'd grown up in foster care, how she'd spent years searching for her brother. It was raw and real, and Ethan couldn't help but feel drawn to her honesty. But the doubts remained, gnawing at him. What was Maddie really after? Why had she come into their lives at such a critical moment? The following days were filled with tension that hung over the mansion like a heavy fog. Maddie could feel it in the way the staff whispered behind her back, the way Rachel seemed to watch her every move, and most of all, in the way Ethan looked at her no longer with the open curiosity he had first shown, but with a guarded suspicion. Maddie spent most of her time with Sam, whose health had continued to improve. His smiles were more frequent now, and his laughter was a sound she treasured. They spent hours together reading, playing in the garden, and even making small breakthroughs in his physical therapy. Sam was learning to trust her, and in return, Maddie found herself growing more attached to him. But the more things improved with Sam, the more strained her relationship with Ethan became. One evening, after Maddie had tucked Sam into bed and was preparing to retire for the night, Rachel appeared at the door of her guest room, her face twisted with a mixture of triumph and pity. "Mr. Reeves would like to speak with you," Rachel said, her voice dripping with false politeness. Maddie's heart sank. Something was wrong. She could feel it in the pit of her stomach. She followed Rachel downstairs to Ethan's office, where he stood behind his large oak desk, his expression dark and unreadable. A small black velvet box sat on the desk between them. "Ethan," Maddie asked, her voice tentative. He didn't look up at her right away. Instead, he opened the box and pulled out a delicate gold necklace, a necklace that Maddie had never seen before. "This belonged to my wife," Ethan said, his tone low, cold. "It was missing for weeks, and I didn't know where it went until Rachel found it." "In your room." Maddie's breath caught in her throat. "What?" "No, I didn't," she began, but Ethan cut her off with a sharp look. "I trusted you, Maddie," he said, his voice tight with anger. "I let you into my home, near my son, and this is how you repay me, by stealing from us." Maddie's world felt like it was spinning out of control. "I didn't steal anything, Ethan. I swear, I've never even seen that necklace before. Someone must have—" "Enough," Ethan snapped, his frustration boiling over. "Do you expect me to believe that someone planted it in your room? Why would anyone do that?" Maddie opened her mouth to argue, but the words died on her lips. She knew why, Rachel. But she had no proof. No way of convincing Ethan that Rachel had set her up. "I've been nothing but honest with you," Maddie said, her voice shaking. "You know me, Ethan. You know I wouldn't do something like this." Ethan's jaw clenched and he turned away, his hands gripping the edge of the desk. "I don't know you, Maddie," he said, his voice quieter now, filled with something that sounded almost like regret. "I thought I did, but I don't." The room was silent, the only sound the ticking of the clock on the wall. Finally, Maddie spoke, her voice small. "He'll leave." Ethan looked up, surprise flickering in his eyes. "What?" "If you don't trust me," Maddie said, fighting back tears, "then he'll leave. But I need to find my brother Ethan. I can't stay where I'm not trusted." For a long moment, Ethan said nothing. Then, with a sigh that seemed to come from deep within, he nodded. "Fine," he said. "He'll have Marcus drive you wherever you need to go." Maddie's heart broke as she nodded in return, feeling the finality of the moment. She turned and left the office, her chest tight with the weight of Ethan's doubt. She had been so close to finding a home, to helping Sam, to maybe even finding some happiness of her own. But now, it felt like everything was crumbling around her. As she packed her few belongings, she heard the soft sound of footsteps behind her. She turned to see Sam standing in the doorway, his eyes wide and filled with confusion. "Are you leaving?" he asked, his voice small and scared. Maddie's heart twisted painfully. She knelt in front of him, brushing a strand of hair away from his face. "I have to, Sam," she said softly. "But you're going to be okay. You're stronger than you think." Tears welled up in Sam's eyes, and he wrapped his small arms around her neck, clinging to her. "Please don't go," he whispered. Maddie hugged him tightly, her own tears threatening to spill over. "I wish I could stay," she whispered back. "But I can't." The storm outside mirrored the turmoil inside Ethan's heart. After Maddie had left, the house felt colder, emptier, despite Rachel's best efforts to assure him that things would return to normal now that she was gone. But things didn't feel normal. If anything, they felt worse. Ethan had watched the footage from the camera in Sam's room every night since Maddie arrived, convinced that he would find something, anything that would confirm his suspicions about her. But the more he watched, the more he found himself doubting Rachel's accusations. Maddie had been nothing but kind, patient, and gentle with Sam. She had opened up to him in a way no one else had, sharing pieces of her own pain to comfort him. There was no trace of deception in her actions, no sign that she had been anything other than genuine. And then there was the necklace. Rachel had been quick to find it, quick to point fingers. Too quick. Ethan's mind raced as he reviewed the footage again, looking for something he might have missed. And then there it was. In the lower corner of the frame, just barely visible, was Rachel, slipping into Maddie's room while Maddie was downstairs with Sam. She had the necklace in her hand, tucking it into Maddie's bag with the kind of care that only someone who knew what they were doing would have. Ethan's blood ran cold. He felt sick with guilt, with anger, with the realization that he had let Rachel manipulate him into turning against Maddie. He stood abruptly, grabbing his keys and heading for the door. He had to find Maddie. He had to fix this. Maddie sat on a park bench, her duffel bag at her feet, her heart heavy. The rain had let up, but the chill in the air remained. She hadn't gone far, just far enough to think. She wasn't sure where to go from here. She had no money, no home, and no idea where to even start looking for her brother. But she knew one thing: she couldn't go back to the streets. Not again. As she sat there staring out at the empty park, she heard footsteps approaching. She turned, and her heart skipped a beat when she saw Ethan walking toward her, his face etched with determination. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. Ethan stopped in front of her, his eyes filled with regret. "I made a mistake," he said, his voice rough. "Rachel set you up. I saw it on the camera. She planted the necklace in your room." Maddie's breath caught in her throat. "What?" "I'm sorry," Ethan continued, stepping closer. "I should have believed you. I should have trusted you. But I let my own fears, my own doubts, cloud my judgment." Maddie stood, her emotions a whirlwind. She wanted to be angry, to tell him how much his lack of trust had hurt her. But looking at him now, seeing the guilt in his eyes, she found that she couldn't. "You hurt me, Ethan," she said, her voice shaking. "You doubted me when all I wanted to do was help." "I know," Ethan said, his voice breaking. "And I'll never forgive myself for that. But I'm asking, begging for a chance to make it right. Please, Maddie, don't leave." Maddie looked at him, searching his face for any sign that this was another trick, another betrayal. But all she saw was sincerity and something else, something deeper. "I don't know if I can stay," Maddie said softly. "I need to find my brother, Ethan. I can't give up on him." Ethan nodded. "Then let me help you. Let me help you find him. And once we do, maybe you'll find that you've already found a home. Here, with us." Tears welled in Maddie's eyes, but this time they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of hope. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she wasn't facing it alone. "Okay," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "But we have to start looking. Now." Ethan smiled, a small, tentative smile, and nodded. "Let's go." The next few days were a whirlwind. Ethan had hired a private investigator to track down leads on Jake, Maddie's younger brother, and every day brought them closer to finding him. Maddie was anxious, but there was also a sense of determination driving her forward. She had spent years searching for Jake, but now, with Ethan's help, it felt like she was finally making progress. As they sifted through records and followed leads, Maddie began to open up to Ethan more. She told him about her childhood, how she and Jake had been separated when they were put into the foster system, how she had spent years bouncing from one home to another, always trying to find a way back to him. Ethan listened, his heart aching for her. He couldn't imagine what she had been through, but he admired her strength, her resilience. "I don't know how you did it," Ethan said one evening as they sat together poring over files. Maddie shrugged, her expression distant. "You do what you have to. I promised myself I'd never give up on him. And I won't." Ethan reached across the table and took her hand, squeezing it gently. "You're not alone anymore, Maddie. We'll find him. Together." The air around the dilapidated foster home was thick with tension. Maddie stood frozen on the porch, her heart hammering in her chest as she stared at Jake, her long-lost brother. The boy who stood before her was a shadow of the little brother she had loved and fought so hard to find. He was taller now, lanky with hardened eyes that spoke of years spent in a broken system. But the look in those eyes when he met Maddie's gaze shattered her heart. "I don't know you," Jake said, his voice cold and detached. Maddie felt the ground shift beneath her. She had imagined this moment so many times, how she would find Jake, how she would hug him and tell him she never gave up on him, that they could finally be together. But this was nothing like she had dreamed. "I'm your sister," Maddie said, her voice trembling. "Jake, it's me. I've been looking for you for years." Jake's expression didn't soften. If anything, his face hardened further. "I don't need you to look for me. I've been fine on my own." Behind them, the foster parents stood on the porch, their arms crossed, watching the scene unfold with barely concealed disdain. They had been reluctant to let Jake even come to the door, and now Maddie understood why. They had poisoned him against her, against the idea of family. "Jake, please," Maddie whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I didn't abandon you. I tried to stay with you, but they wouldn't let me. They took me to another foster home, and I've been searching for you ever since." Jake's lips curled into a sneer. "Yeah, right. That's what they all say. But nobody sticks around. Not for me." Maddie felt tears welling in her eyes. She wanted to reach out, to hold him, to make him understand. But the wall between them seemed impenetrable. "I'm not going anywhere this time," Maddie said, her voice firm despite the tears. "You're coming with me. I want you to live with me. With us." Ethan, who had been standing silently beside her, finally stepped forward. "We want to help you, Jake," he said gently, his presence calm and reassuring. "We want to give you a real home." Jake shot a glance at Ethan, his expression filled with distrust. "Why would you care? You're just some rich guy. You don't know anything about me." Ethan nodded, acknowledging the truth in Jake's words. "You're right. I don't know what you've been through, but I do know what it's like to lose people you love. And I know that family is worth fighting for." Jake shifted uncomfortably, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. "I don't need your help." Maddie's heart broke all over again. "You might not want it now, Jake, but I'm not going to leave you here. I won't walk away." The foster parents, sensing the conversation was slipping out of their control, finally intervened. "This boy's been nothing but trouble," the man said gruffly, glaring at Jake. "If you want him, take him. We won't stop you." Maddie's hands clenched into fists at the man's cruel words, but before she could respond, Ethan put a calming hand on her shoulder. "We'll take care of everything," Ethan said, his voice level. "Just tell us what we need to do." Over the next few days, Ethan and Maddie worked tirelessly to finalize the paperwork that would allow Jake to move in with them. It wasn't easy. Jake was resistant at every turn, refusing to engage with either Maddie or Ethan. But Maddie didn't let his attitude deter her. She had fought too hard to find him, and she wasn't about to give up now. When they finally brought Jake home, the atmosphere at the mansion was tense. Sam had been eagerly awaiting Jake's arrival, hoping to make a new friend. But Jake kept his distance, retreating to the guest room and closing the door behind him. Maddie watched him, her heart heavy. She knew this was going to take time. Jake had been hurt too many times to trust easily. But she was determined to show him that he wasn't alone anymore, that he had a family who cared about him. Despite Maddie's best efforts, the first few weeks with Jake were rocky. He barely spoke to anyone, spending most of his time in his room or out in the yard, keeping to himself. Sam tried to reach out, offering to play video games or go for walks, but Jake's responses were always short and dismissive. Ethan, who had been patient and understanding, began to worry. He saw the strain this was putting on Maddie, and he wanted to help, but every attempt to talk to Jake seemed to push him further away. Meanwhile, Rachel, the former housekeeper, had not disappeared quietly. Despite being fired for her betrayal, she had continued to meddle in Ethan and Maddie's lives, spreading rumors about Maddie's past and trying to discredit her in the eyes of the public. One afternoon, a letter arrived, a legal notice from Rachel's lawyer, accusing Maddie of emotional manipulation and claiming that she had coerced Jake into leaving his foster home. The lawsuit was absurd, but the damage it could do to Maddie's reputation and to Jake's fragile sense of belonging was real. Maddie stared at the letter in disbelief, her hands shaking. "This can't be happening," she whispered. Ethan, his jaw clenched in anger, took the letter from her and crumpled it in his fist. "She's not going to get away with this," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Well, fight her." But Maddie wasn't so sure. She had spent her life fighting to survive, fighting to find her brother, and now, just when she thought she might finally have a chance at peace, Rachel was threatening to take it all away. "What if Jake believes her?" Maddie asked, her voice breaking. "What if he thinks I'm just using him?" Ethan pulled her into his arms, his voice gentle but firm. "Jake's scared, Maddie, but he'll see the truth. He'll see that you've been there for him all along." Maddie nodded, though her heart was still heavy with doubt. She knew that the lawsuit was just another of Rachel's schemes to hurt her, but the thought of losing Jake after finally finding him was more than she could bear. As the lawsuit loomed over them, Maddie and Ethan prepared for the battle ahead. Their lawyer assured them that the case had no merit, but Maddie couldn't shake the fear that Rachel's lies would be enough to tear her new family apart. Jake, meanwhile, remained distant, unaware of the full extent of Rachel's manipulations. But as the days passed, he began to notice the tension in the house, the hushed conversations between Ethan and Maddie, the way they seemed to be bracing for something bad. One evening after dinner, Jake finally confronted Maddie. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice edged with suspicion. "Why are you and Ethan always whispering, 'What aren't you telling me?'" Maddie hesitated, not wanting to overwhelm him, but she knew she couldn't hide the truth from him any longer. "There's a lawsuit," Maddie said quietly. "Rachel, the woman who used to work here, is trying to make it look like I forced you to leave the foster home. She's lying, Jake, but we're going to fight her." Jake's eyes widened in shock. "What? Why would she do that?" Maddie took a deep breath. "She wants to hurt me. She's been trying to tear us apart since the beginning. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner, but I didn't want you to worry." Jake stared at her, his expression unreadable. For a long moment he said nothing, and Maddie's heart sank, fearing the worst. But then, to her surprise, Jake's shoulders slumped, and he let out a shaky breath. "I don't get it," he muttered. "Why would anyone care that much about hurting someone?" Maddie stepped closer, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "Sometimes people do awful things because they're angry or jealous. But we're not going to let her win, Jake. We're going to fight this, and we're going to win. I promise." For the first time since he had arrived, Jake didn't pull away. He nodded, his eyes filled with uncertainty but also a glimmer of trust. "Okay," he said quietly. "Okay." The day of the court hearing arrived, and the tension in the air was palpable. Maddie, Ethan, and Jake sat together in the courtroom, facing off against Rachel, who sat smugly on the other side of the room with her lawyer. The proceedings were tense, but as the evidence was presented, it became clear that Rachel's accusations were baseless. The private investigator that Ethan had hired had uncovered documents proving that Rachel had been paying off individuals to fabricate stories about Maddie's past, and witnesses came forward to testify to Rachel's manipulative behavior. Jake, though nervous, took the stand and testified in Maddie's defense. His testimony was powerful. He told the court about how Maddie had searched for him for years, how she had never given up on him, and how he had come to realize that she had always been there for him, even when he didn't want to see it. By the time the trial ended, there was no doubt left in the courtroom. The judge ruled in Maddie's favor, dismissing all of Rachel's claims and ordering her to pay damages for defamation and emotional distress. As the verdict was read, Maddie felt a wave of relief wash over her. It was over. Rachel's hold on her life was finally broken. After the trial, Maddie, Ethan, and Jake returned to the mansion, exhausted but triumphant. Sam greeted them at the door, his smile wide and bright. "We did it," Maddie whispered, hugging Sam tightly. Jake, standing awkwardly to the side, watched them, unsure of his place in this new family. But then, to Maddie's surprise, Sam walked over to Jake and handed him a small toy gesture of friendship that left Jake momentarily speechless. "Thanks, kid," Jake said, ruffling Sam's hair. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Maddie smiled a real, genuine smile. The months following the trial brought a sense of peace that Maddie hadn't known in years. The mansion, once filled with tension and uncertainty, had become a place of warmth and laughter. Ethan, always the quiet protector, had become more than just a benefactor to Maddie and Jake. He had become their rock, their family. And as time passed, the bond between Maddie and Ethan deepened, transforming from friendship into something more. One evening, as the sun set over the mansion's sprawling garden, Ethan took Maddie's hand and led her to a quiet spot beneath the trees. "Maddie," he said softly, his voice filled with emotion, "you've changed my life. You've given me back my son, and you've shown me that there's more to life than just surviving. I don't want to go through life without you." Maddie's heart raced as Ethan dropped to one knee, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "Will you stay? Will you be a part of this family? Forever?" Ethan asked, his voice trembling with hope. Tears filled Maddie's eyes as she nodded, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes," she whispered. "Forever." A year later, the mansion was alive with the sounds of family. Sam, now stronger and healthier than ever, ran through the garden with Jake, who had finally found his place in the world. Maddie and Ethan stood hand in hand, watching their boys with smiles on their faces. They had faced their demons, overcome the shadows of the past, and found a future filled with hope and love. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Maddie felt a sense of peace settle over her. After everything they had been through, they had found what they had always wanted: a home, a family, and a future filled with possibilities. And for the first time in a long time, Maddie knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. A year had passed, and the Reeves mansion was no longer a place of sorrow but one filled with laughter and love. Jake had found his purpose, thriving in school and technology, while Sam, now healthier and stronger, embraced life with joy. Maddie and Ethan, hand in hand, watched their boys play in the garden, knowing they had built the family they had always dreamed of. Thank you for joining us on this heartfelt journey. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss what's coming next. Let us know in the comments what touched you most. We love hearing from you. Stay tuned for more stories of love, hope, and redemption. David had also made a point to hire people from underrepresented communities, offering opportunities to those who had been overlooked by the high-end culinary world. He reached out to small local suppliers, farmers, bakers, and artisans whose products reflected the heart and soul of the communities they came from. These relationships were built on trust and mutual respect, not the transactional arrogance that had once defined his dealings with suppliers. As David looked around the restaurant, he couldn't help but think back to the days of the Pinnacle, when every detail had been polished to perfection, but the heart of the place had been hollow. The common table was different. It wasn't about exclusivity, it was about making people feel welcome, valued, and respected. David knew that he couldn't erase the past, and he didn't try to. The scandal that had nearly destroyed him was still a part of his story, but it no longer defined him. Instead, it served as a reminder of the lessons he had learned, the importance of humility, the power of kindness, and the need to listen to others. In the quiet moments, when the restaurant had closed for the night and he sat alone with his thoughts, David often reflected on his journey. There were still days when he struggled with the weight of his past mistakes, but he had come to accept that true change wasn't about achieving perfection. It was about striving to be better, day by day, and making the choice to learn from the people around him. Though David's restaurant was flourishing, his public reputation remained a mixed bag. Some in the culinary world still looked at him with skepticism, their memories of the scandal too fresh to forgive easily. Every now and then, an article or blog post would resurface, reminding people of the viral video that had brought the pinnacle down. David didn't shy away from this part of his story. He had made peace with the fact that some people would never forget, and perhaps never forgive, what he had done. But that wasn't why he had chosen to change. He hadn't rebuilt his life for the approval of the public. He had done it because he knew it was the right thing to do. Many others, however, had embraced his transformation. The local community had rallied around the common table, recognizing David's genuine efforts to create a space where everyone felt welcome. Journalists who had once been critical of him now wrote stories about the positive impact his restaurant was having on the neighborhood, praising his commitment to supporting small local businesses and his efforts to promote diversity in the industry. One evening, during the height of dinner service, David spotted a familiar face walking through the door. Elijah Grant had come to the common table a few times since it had opened, but each time, David felt a swell of emotion at seeing the man who had, in many ways, set him on this path of transformation. Elijah took a seat at one of the tables near the window, and as soon as David saw him, he made his way over, grateful for the opportunity to catch up. "Elijah," David said with a smile, extending his hand. "It's good to see you." Elijah shook his hand, his expression warm but reserved. "The place is looking great," he said, glancing around at the bustling restaurant. "Thank you," David replied, feeling a surge of pride. "We've been doing well, thanks to the support of the community." They sat down together, and for a few moments they watched the ebb and flow of the restaurant. The atmosphere was relaxed, the staff moving effortlessly between the tables, the kitchen alive with the sounds of laughter and sizzling pans. It was a world away from the stiff, high-pressure environment that had once defined the Pinnacle. "How are things on your end?" David asked, genuinely curious about Elijah's life and business. Elijah nodded thoughtfully. "Grant Foods is thriving, thankfully. We've expanded our partnerships with a lot of local restaurants, and the work we're doing with small farms is really paying off." David smiled, but there was a deeper question on his mind, one that he had hesitated to ask before. He took a breath and asked, "Do you think I've changed?" Elijah looked at him, his gaze steady and thoughtful. "You've come a long way," he said after a moment. "But real change isn't something you can measure in a year or even 5 years. It's something you have to keep working at. You've made a good start, but the work doesn't stop here." David nodded, understanding the truth in Elijah's words. He had worked hard to rebuild his life, but he knew that true redemption was an ongoing process. There would always be more to learn, more ways to grow, more people to listen to. Elijah's words didn't feel like a criticism. They felt like a reminder of the journey ahead, and David welcomed it. As time went on, the common table continued to grow, not just as a restaurant, but as a symbol of the power of transformation. David became a mentor to young chefs and restaurateurs, especially those from marginalized backgrounds, sharing the lessons he had learned the hard way. He spoke openly about his mistakes, using his platform to advocate for greater inclusion and fairness in the culinary industry. The restaurant became known not just for its food, but for its values: respect, kindness, and community. It was a place where people from different walks of life could come together and share a meal, where the walls that had once divided them were torn down. And for David, that was the greatest success of all. The story ends with a quiet moment, late at night after the restaurant has closed. David sits at one of the tables, a cup of coffee in front of him, reflecting on how far he's come. The dining room is empty, the lights dim, but there's a warmth that fills the of peace that David has never felt before. He knows that the journey isn't over, that there will always be challenges, setbacks, and moments of doubt. But for the first time in his life, David is content. He's found a new purpose, one that isn't tied to status or power, but to the simple joy of making a difference in people's lives. As he takes a sip of his coffee, he smiles to himself. The road to redemption had been long and difficult, but it had been worth every step. In the year following the opening of the common table, David King's life had changed dramatically. The initial challenges of running the new restaurant paled in comparison to the internal work he was doing on himself. No longer motivated by status or wealth, David found himself living a simpler life, one that prioritized relationships, integrity, and service over prestige. His restaurant had earned a reputation not for being a place of luxury or exclusivity like the Pinnacle, but for its heart. Word had spread throughout the city about the welcoming atmosphere and diverse menu that celebrated cultural richness. Unlike the Pinnacle, the Common Table wasn't just a place to eat, it had become a gathering spot where stories were shared, connections were formed, and community flourished. David's leadership had evolved. Where once he ruled his kitchen with an iron fist, demanding perfection at the expense of his staff's well-being, he now led with empathy. He took the time to know his employees personally, learning their stories, their aspirations, and their struggles. David made a point of mentoring young chefs like Rachel, guiding them not only in their culinary skills, but also in how to lead with humility and respect. He had learned that success wasn't defined by being at the top, it was defined by lifting others up. Rachel, now a head chef in her own right, reflected on her journey often. The David King who hired me at the Pinnacle and the one who runs the Common Table are two completely different people, she said one evening while cleaning up after service. He's not just a boss anymore, he's someone who actually listens. David overheard this, a faint smile pulling at his lips. He had been listening, more really listening, for the first time in his life. And what he'd heard had changed him. One quiet Sunday morning, David's older brother, Tom, came by the restaurant for breakfast. The two had reconnected during David's downfall after years of estrangement due to David's ego and obsessive pursuit of success. Now, their relationship was slowly mending, piece by piece, and Tom had become a regular at the Common Table. They sat together at one of the window-side tables, the soft morning light filtering in through the glass. The restaurant wasn't open yet, so it was just the two of them, sharing coffee and talking about their lives, something they hadn't done in years. Tom sipped his coffee thoughtfully. You know, David, I never thought I'd see you like this. The way you've turned things around. It's impressive. David smiled, though there was a hint of humility in it. I didn't do it alone. A lot of people helped me get here. Tom nodded. Still, I'm proud of you. You could have given up when everything went south, but you didn't. You stuck it out and decided to change. David glanced out the window at the early morning street, lost in thought. I didn't have much of a choice, he said quietly. I had to face the fact that I'd been living my life the wrong way. I hurt a lot of people, including you. Tom shook his head, his expression softening. We all make mistakes, David. It's what you do after that matters. And from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've done a lot of good since then. David met his brother's eyes, feeling a wave of gratitude. The distance that had once existed between them was fading, replaced by a sense of mutual respect. For years, David had dismissed Tom as someone who didn't understand ambition or success, but now he realized that his brother had always understood something far more important: how to live with kindness and integrity. Later that week, Elijah Grant stopped by for lunch. David hadn't expected him, but seeing Elijah walk through the door always gave him a sense of both nervousness and hope. They had come a long way since the incident at the Pinnacle, but there was still a quiet tension between them, an unspoken acknowledgement that while David had changed, the wound of their initial confrontation had left its mark. Elijah ordered his usual simple but flavorful dish that had become one of his favorites at the Common Table. As he ate, David sat down across from him, wanting to catch up and, if he was honest, hoping to gauge Elijah's feelings about where their relationship stood. Elijah, David began, his voice steady but thoughtful, I've been thinking a lot about our conversations. You've taught me more than I can put into words. Elijah looked up from his plate, nodding. I appreciate that, David. But you know, this was just about teaching you. It's about recognizing that you're part of something bigger than yourself now. David considered this for a moment, letting the weight of those words settle in. He had spent years chasing individual success, believing that his achievements were the ultimate measure of his worth. But Elijah was right. The Common Table wasn't about him. It was about the community it had fostered, the people who gathered there, and the connections that were made over shared meals. "I get that now," David said. "I used to think it was all about my reputation, my success. But this restaurant, it's not mine anymore. It belongs to everyone who walks through those doors." Elijah smiled slightly, a rare expression of approval. "That's the kind of change I hope to see in you." They sat in silence for a moment, the bustling sounds of the restaurant around them. David felt a sense of closure, but not an ending. This was just another step in his journey, a journey that would continue as long as he stayed committed to the values he had learned. As the months passed, the common table continued to thrive, not just as a restaurant, but as a symbol of what a business could be when it was built on values of empathy, respect, and community. David's transformation had inspired others in the culinary industry, and soon he began to receive invitations to speak at events and panels about his journey. People wanted to hear his story, not the scandal that had nearly destroyed him, but the lessons he had learned from it. David wasn't looking for redemption in the public eye anymore, but he accepted these opportunities because he believed they could help others see that change was possible. He spoke openly about his mistakes, his prejudices, and the arrogance that had led him astray. But more importantly, he spoke about the power of community, the way that listening to others, especially those who had been marginalized, had changed his perspective and his life. David also took on the role of a mentor for aspiring restaurateurs, especially those from minority backgrounds who faced challenges breaking into the industry. He worked closely with Elijah and others in the community to create programs that offered mentorship, training, and financial support to those looking to start their own businesses. One of these young entrepreneurs, Samantha Patel, had opened a small bakery down the street from the common table, and with David's help, she had begun to build a loyal customer base. Watching Samantha's success reminded David of the excitement he had felt when the Pinnacle first opened, but this time the feeling was different. It wasn't about his own pride or accomplishments, it was about helping someone else realize their dream. "I couldn't have done it without your support," Samantha told David one afternoon, after another busy day at the bakery. David smiled warmly. "You did all the hard work, Samantha. I'm just glad I could help in some small way." As he walked back to the common table, David felt a sense of peace that had eluded him for so long. He had once been driven by ambition, by the desire to be seen and admired, but now he found joy in watching others succeed. That, he realized, was the true reward. The epilogue closes with David reflecting on everything he's learned and everything he's still learning. Late one evening, after the restaurant has closed and the last staff member has left, David sits alone at a table by the window, looking out at the quiet street. The dim light of the restaurant casts a warm glow over the empty chairs and tables, and David takes a moment to breathe in the peace of the moment. He thinks back to the man he used to be, the David King, who had built the Pinnacle on arrogance, who had cared more about his status than the people around him. He had been blind to the impact his words and actions had on others, and it had taken losing everything for him to finally see the truth. But now, sitting in the heart of the common table, David feels something he hadn't felt in years: contentment. Not the fleeting satisfaction of a job well done, but the deeper, quieter contentment that comes from knowing he's doing something meaningful. His restaurant is the pinnacle of fine dining, but it's something better. It's a place where people from all walks of life can come together, share a meal, and feel at home. David smiles to himself, knowing that his journey isn't over. There will always be more to learn, more ways to grow, and more people to listen to. But for now, in this moment, he is at peace. And that, he realizes, is all he ever truly wanted. Thank you for joining me on this journey through David King's Transformation: A Story about humility, growth, and the power of community. If you enjoyed this story and want more thought-provoking, inspiring narratives that dig deep into human emotions and life lessons, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. That way, you'll never miss another story that just might leave you thinking about the world a little differently. Stay tuned for more stories that challenge, inspire, and entertain right here on this channel. Sarah's eyes widened as she read the note. "Oh my God, Alicia!" Mark took the letter from Sarah, his expression darkening as he read the hateful words. "This is unacceptable," he said, his voice filled with anger. "We need to report this to the police." "I don't know if that will help," Alicia said, her voice trembling. "Whoever wrote this didn't leave a name. And even if they did, I don't want to live in fear." Sarah reached over and took Alicia's hand. "You don't have to live in fear, Alicia. You're part of our family. We'll do whatever it takes to protect you." Alicia blinked back tears, grateful for the Bennetts' unwavering support. But even with their reassurance, the fear gnawed at her. She loved this town, loved the children she cared for, but she couldn't ignore the reality of the situation. There were people in Meadowbrook who didn't want her here, and she couldn't pretend that everything would go back to normal overnight. "I've been thinking," Alicia said slowly, her voice heavy with emotion. "Maybe it would be best if I left town for a while, just until things calm down." Sarah's eyes widened in shock. "Leave but Alicia. This is your home." "I know," Alicia said, her voice trembling, "but I don't feel safe anymore. I don't know if I ever will." In the days that followed, Alicia wrestled with the decision of whether or not to leave Meadowbrook. The support from the Bennetts and the community had been overwhelming, but the fear remained. Every time she stepped outside, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her, waiting for her to make a mistake. She knew she couldn't live like this forever, but she also didn't want to give in to fear. She had spent years building a life here, making friends, caring for the Bennett children, becoming a part of the community. Leaving felt like running away, like letting the people who hated her win. One evening, after putting the children to bed, Alicia sat down with Sarah and Mark to talk about her decision. "I've thought a lot about what you both said," Alicia began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "And I've decided to stay." Sarah's face lit up with relief. "Oh, Alicia, I'm so glad." Alicia smiled softly. "I love this town. I love your family. And I won't let the fear control me anymore." Mark nodded, his expression filled with admiration. "Well, stand by you, Alicia. Whatever happens, we're here for you." As Alicia made the decision to stay in Meadowbrook, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. The incident in the park had shaken her to her core, but it had also opened her eyes to the power of her voice. She had never seen herself as an activist, but now she realized that she had a responsibility, not just to herself, but to the community. She began attending local meetings and joining conversations about how to address the racial tensions that had been exposed by the incident. She worked with other community leaders to organize workshops on diversity and inclusion, speaking out about her experience and encouraging others to confront their own biases. Through it all, Alicia found strength in the people who had supported her, the Bennetts, the neighbors who had rallied around her, and even some of the people who had once looked at her with suspicion. Slowly but surely, Meadowbrook began to change. Months had passed since the incident at Meadowbrook Park, and the town had changed in ways that no one could have imagined. What had once been a place of quiet, unspoken tensions had evolved into a community that actively engaged with its issues, rather than brushing them aside. Meadowbrook was no longer divided by racial lines or assumptions. Instead, it was becoming a beacon of hope for those who believed in reconciliation and growth. The Unity Festival, an event organized by the town's leaders in partnership with local activists, was the clearest sign of this transformation. Held in the town square, the festival was a celebration of the town's diversity, bringing together people from all walks of life to enjoy music, food, and fellowship. Colorful banners waved in the crisp autumn air, and the sound of laughter and conversation filled the streets. It was a day meant to heal the wounds of the past and celebrate the progress that had been made. Jason stood near the entrance to the square, taking it all in. His heart felt heavy with emotion as he watched children of all races playing together on the newly renovated playground, their laughter carrying across the open space. The sight filled him with both hope and regret. It was a stark reminder of how far the town had come and how far he had fallen. He had been removed from his position as sheriff, a consequence he had come to accept, though it still stung. But today wasn't about him. It was about the town, about Alicia, and about the future. Since losing his badge, Jason had found a new purpose. he had dedicated himself to working on community projects, including leading workshops for law enforcement on racial bias and cultural sensitivity. It wasn't easy at first. Many of his former colleagues were reluctant to engage in such conversations, and the pain of losing the career he had built was still fresh. But Jason knew this was the only way forward. He had partnered with local leaders, including Alicia, to organize programs that encouraged dialogue between the police and the people they served. His life had taken a sharp turn from what he had envisioned, but he was finally beginning to understand the power of real accountability and the importance of personal growth. As he stood there, he felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned to see Alicia standing beside him, a soft smile on her face. "I'm glad you could make it," she said, her voice warm but cautious. Jason smiled back, grateful for her presence. "I wouldn't miss it for the world," he replied. "This festival, it's incredible. Look at what we've all built together." Alicia nodded, her eyes scanning the crowd. "It's a good start. There's still work to be done, but today is about celebrating the progress we've made." Jason's heart swelled with emotion. "I'm grateful for your help," he said, his voice thick. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." Alicia met his gaze, her expression softening. "It's not about me, Jason. It's about all of us. But I'm glad you found a way to make things right." Just then, Sarah Bennett approached with the children in tow, both of them running ahead to greet Alicia. They hugged her tightly, their faces beaming with excitement. Miss Alicia Eli shouted, his voice filled with joy. "Can we go get some cotton candy?" Alicia laughed, ruffling his hair. "Sure, go on ahead. I'll catch up with you in a minute." As the children ran off toward the food stands, Sarah smiled at Jason and Alicia. "It's amazing, isn't it, seeing everyone come together like this?" Jason nodded, feeling the weight of the moment. "It is," he agreed. "It's more than I ever thought was possible." Sarah's eyes met Jason's, her expression serious but kind. "You've come a long way, Jason. I know it hasn't been easy, but I want you to know that we see the work you've been doing. The town sees it." Jason felt a lump form in his throat. He had spent so much time trying to make amends, but hearing those words from Sarah, a woman whose family he had wronged, felt like the first real step toward healing. "Thank you," he said quietly. "That means more to me than you know." Sarah smiled, her eyes warm. "We all make mistakes, Jason. What matters is how we choose to grow from them." As Sarah walked away to join her family, Jason stood in the fading light of the afternoon, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't known in a long time. He wasn't fully redeemed, not yet, but he was on the right path. As the sun began to set, the festival reached its climax. The mayor, Garrett Wilson, took to the stage, addressing the crowd that had gathered in the town square. "Today is a special day for Meadowbrook," Mayor Wilson began, his voice ringing out over the crowd. "It's a day to celebrate who we are as a community and the progress we've made together. But more importantly, it's a day to acknowledge that the journey toward justice and equality is ongoing. We've come a long way, but there is still more work to be done." The crowd erupted in applause, and Jason felt a swell of pride as he stood beside Alicia, watching the town embrace the moment. The mayor continued, highlighting the initiatives that had been put in place to address racial bias in policing and to create a more inclusive community. Finally, Mayor Wilson turned his attention to Jason, inviting him to the stage. Jason hesitated for a moment, his heart pounding in his chest. This was the first time he had been in such a public spotlight since the incident, and the weight of the town's eyes on him was overwhelming. But he knew this was part of his journey, part of making things right. He stepped up to the podium, taking a deep breath before speaking. "I stand before you today not as the sheriff I once was, but as someone who is trying to be better. I've made mistakes that hurt people I care about. And I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for a chance to keep doing the work, to keep learning, and to keep growing." The crowd was silent, listening intently. "I'm proud of the changes we've made as a community," Jason continued, his voice steady. "And I'm committed to continuing this work, not just for myself, but for all of us. Meadowbrook is a special place, and I believe that together we can build a future where everyone feels safe, valued, and seen." He stepped back from the podium, his heart racing, and was met with applause. It wasn't overwhelming, but it was genuine. And for Jason, that was enough. In the days following the festival, Alicia found herself reflecting on everything that had happened. The Unity Festival had been a success, and the town was slowly healing, but Alicia knew that her journey wasn't over. She had decided to stay in Meadowbrook, but she also knew that there was still work to be done, not just for the community, but for herself. One morning, as she walked through the park where everything had started, she felt a sense of closure beginning to form. The playground was filled with children, their laughter echoing through the air, and Alicia couldn't help but smile. She had come a long way since that day, and while the scars were still there, they were healing. As she sat down on a bench, she was joined by Rachel Collins, one of the local activists who had worked closely with her in organizing the festival. "Hey," Rachel said, sitting beside her. "How are you feeling?" Alicia smiled softly. "Better. Lighter, I guess. It feels like we've turned a corner, but I know there's still a lot of work ahead." Rachel nodded. "Yeah, but we've made real progress. People are talking, and that's the first step. You've been a huge part of that, Alicia. You've inspired so many people to stand up and speak out." Alicia's heart swelled with pride. She had never seen herself as a leader, but now she realized that her voice had power, and she was ready to use it. Meanwhile, Jason was finding his own way forward. Though he was no longer sheriff, he had embraced his role in the community in a new capacity. He worked closely with law enforcement to implement changes in how officers were trained, focusing on de-escalation tactics and addressing implicit bias. His fall from grace had been hard, but it had also been the catalyst for a transformation he never would have expected. One afternoon, Jason was sitting in a diner, sipping coffee and reviewing notes for an upcoming training session. He had been meeting with local leaders and community members, trying to gather feedback on what was working and what still needed improvement. As he flipped through his notes, the bell over the door jingled, and Officer Kyle Sanders walked in. Kyle had been Jason's partner for years, and their relationship had become strained after the incident. "Mind if I join you?" Kyle asked, standing by the booth. Jason nodded, motioning for him to sit. "Of course." Kyle sat down, ordering a cup of coffee before turning to Jason. "I've been hearing good things about the workshops you've been leading," he said, his tone cautious but genuine. Jason smiled. "Thanks. It's been different, but in a good way. We're making progress." Kyle nodded, taking a sip of his coffee. "I wasn't sure at first, but after sitting through one of the sessions, I get it now. There are things I hadn't considered, ways I hadn't looked at certain situations. I think this is really important work." Jason felt a swell of gratitude. He had been working hard to make amends, and hearing that the message was getting through was more than he could have hoped for. "I appreciate that, Kyle. It means a lot to me." The two men sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of their past slowly beginning to lift. That evening, Jason returned home to find Emily sitting on the porch, her face soft with a mix of emotions. Since the incident, their relationship had been strained, but Jason had been trying to rebuild the trust he had lost. "Hey, Dad," Emily said as he approached. "I saw the video of your speech at the festival. You did a good job." Jason smiled, sitting beside her. "Thanks, sweetheart. I'm trying." Emily looked down at her hands, her voice soft. "I know, and I can see the changes you're making. I didn't think I'd be able to get past what happened, but I'm proud of you, Dad."
You're really trying to be better?
Jason felt tears sting his eyes, but he blinked them back, his heart swelling with gratitude. "That means the world to me, Emily. I'm just glad I haven't lost you." Emily leaned over, resting her head on his shoulder. "You didn't lose me, Dad. I was just hurt. But I see now that you're learning, and that's what matters." They sat together in the fading light of the evening, the weight of the past finally beginning to lift. Jason knew he had a long way to go, but for the first time, he felt like he was truly on the path to healing, not just with his community, but with his family. As autumn gave way to winter, the town of Meadowbrook continued to evolve. The initiatives that had been put in place were gaining momentum, and the conversations about race, justice, and community were ongoing. People were learning, growing, and coming together in ways they never had before. Alicia remained a pillar of strength, continuing her work with local leaders to push for change. She had found her voice, and she wasn't afraid to use it. The fear that had once gripped her had been replaced by a deep sense of belonging and purpose. Jason, too, had found a new sense of peace. He had learned that redemption wasn't about erasing the past, it was about facing it, owning it, and working every day to be better. He had lost his badge, but in the process, he had gained something far more valuable, a deeper understanding of what it meant to truly serve his community. As the first snowflakes of winter began to fall, dusting the town in a soft white blanket, Meadowbrook stood as a symbol of what was possible when people came together to confront their biases and build a future rooted in justice, understanding, and hope. Several months later, Meadowbrook continued to thrive. The town's efforts to address racial tensions had become a model for other communities, with leaders from nearby towns visiting to learn from Meadowbrook's success. Jason had found a new calling in life, dedicating himself fully to the work of reforming police practices. He traveled to different communities, sharing his story and helping other officers confront their own biases. Though he would always carry the weight of his past mistakes, he had found peace in knowing that he was making a difference. Alicia, too, had found her place in Meadowbrook. She had become a respected leader, not just within the town, but beyond. Her voice had inspired others to speak up, and her strength had shown the community what true resilience looked like. As the town came together for another Unity Festival the following year, Jason and Alicia stood side by side, watching the children play and the community celebrate. They had come so far together, and though the journey wasn't over, the future felt brighter than it ever had before. As the story of Jason, Alicia, and Meadowbrook comes to an end, we're reminded of the power of understanding, redemption, and the strength found in unity. Their journey shows us that no matter the mistakes made, there's always a path forward through accountability, growth, and empathy. If you found this story meaningful, don't forget to subscribe to stay tuned for more stories that touch on important themes of community, justice, and healing. Your support helps keep these stories alive, and we'd love to have you with us for the next one. Hit the subscribe button and make sure to turn on notifications so you never miss a new chapter in the journey toward a better world. The meeting hall was packed. People filled every seat, while others stood along the walls. The agenda was to discuss further reforms that would continue the progress they had made, but tensions were high. Some feared too much change too quickly, while others believed that if they didn't keep pushing, the town could fall back into old patterns. Mayor George Dixon called the meeting to order, his voice booming over the crowd. We've come a long way this year, and tonight we need to talk about where we go from here. We've made some tough decisions, but I think we can all agree that Hollow Creek is on a better path. From the back of the room, Tommy Barnes raised his hand. The room quieted as he stood up to speak. Tommy had come a long way since the night he vandalized everyone's place, but there was still uncertainty in the eyes of many. People weren't sure what he would say. "I know I've been on the wrong side of things before," Tommy began, his voice steady but carrying the weight of his past mistakes. "But I've learned that we can't move forward by holding on to hate. I fought against change because I was afraid of losing the town I knew. But I see now that Hollow Creek wasn't perfect, and I want to be part of making it better." There was a murmur of surprise from the crowd, and James, seated near the front, nodded in silent approval. Tommy continued, "I know some of you feel the same way I did, that change is happening too fast. But we can't go back. We shouldn't. We have to keep moving forward together." The room was silent as Tommy sat down, his words sinking in. It was a pivotal moment for the town, as someone who had once been a staunch opponent of progress now stood firmly in support of it. After a few moments, Rachel Morales, who had returned to Hollow Creek to visit and see how the town was progressing, stood up. "Tommy's right. Change is hard, but look around, look at what you've already accomplished. You've come together as a community in ways that wouldn't have been possible a year ago, and you've become an example for towns just like this one, all over the state." As Rachel spoke, heads nodded throughout the room. The crowd seemed united in a way they hadn't been before. The meeting continued with discussions about new initiatives funding for community programs, youth mentorship, and plans to integrate diversity into every facet of public life.
By the time the meeting adjourned, it was clear that Hollow Creek had turned a corner.
The town had decided they were moving forward. Later that evening, after the town meeting had ended, James took a quiet walk through the now peaceful streets of Hollow Creek. As he passed the park, he spotted Mildred Sanders sitting on a bench, her cane resting by her side. "Mind if I join you?" James asked, approaching her with a smile. "Of course, James," Mildred said, her face lighting up. "Sit, sit. I was just thinking about how much has changed since that day at the diner." James sat down beside her, gazing out at the park. Children were playing on the swings, their laughter filling the air, a symbol of the town's new sense of peace. "I was thinking about it too," James said, his voice quiet but reflective. "It feels like so much has happened. But at the same time, it's hard to believe how far we've come." Mildred nodded, her eyes misting over with emotion. "I never thought I'd live to see the day when this town could change like this. For so long it felt like we were stuck. But you showed us something different. You showed us that we could be better." James felt a lump form in his throat. "I didn't do it alone, Mildred. It's been all of us. People like you, Rachel, Emily, Tommy even." Mildred chuckled softly. "Maybe, but we all needed someone to remind us what we were capable of." "That's what you did, James." They sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, watching the sunset over the park. It was a quiet, reflective moment, one that reminded James of why he had stayed, why he had chosen to fight for this town. "It's not over," James said, more to himself than to Mildred. "There's still work to be done." "There's always more to be done," Mildred replied with a knowing smile. "But you've given this town something it didn't have before: hope." Meanwhile, Emily Green had been working on her biggest story yet. The pieces she had written for the local paper had caught the attention of a national magazine, and they had commissioned her to write a long-form feature about the transformation of Hollow Creek. She had spent months interviewing people: James, Tommy, Rachel, Sheriff Nate Johnson, and countless others. She poured her heart into the article, determined to capture the essence of what had happened in this small town. It wasn't just a story about racism or a fight for equality. It was about community, about resilience, about the power of one person's actions to ignite change. When the feature was published, it was an instant success. Readers from across the country were moved by the story of Hollow Creek, and Emily was flooded with messages of support. People wanted to know more. How had the town done it? How could they replicate that success in their own communities? For Emily, it was a deeply personal victory. She had grown up in Hollow Creek, and for a long time, she hadn't believed that the town could change. But now, as she read the responses to her article, she knew that anything was possible. The next spring, the first integrated class graduated from Hollow Creek High School. It was a historic moment, not just for the students, but for the entire town. The graduation ceremony was held in the town square, and the entire community showed up to celebrate. James was there, sitting in the front row with Mildred, Tommy, and Rachel, all of them beaming with pride. Lily Sanders, Mildred's granddaughter, gave the valedictory speech, speaking eloquently about the future, about unity, and about the lessons they had learned from the town's struggles. "We are the generation that will carry this town forward," Lily said, her voice clear and strong, "and we will do it together. Because we've learned that we are stronger when we stand as one." The crowd erupted into applause, and as the graduates tossed their caps into the air, there was a sense of triumph, of new beginnings. Hollow Creek had come so far, and now a new generation was ready to take the reins. As the town continued to grow and change, Harold Brooks made a surprising announcement. He was bringing back the name Rose's Diner. But this time, the name would reflect something different. Harold stood outside the diner, addressing a small crowd of onlookers. James, Mildred, and the rest of the diner's regulars were there, curious about the announcement. "Rose's Diner was named after my mother," Harold began, his voice filled with emotion. "She was a kind woman, a woman who believed in treating everyone with respect. But somewhere along the way, we lost sight of that. We let this place become a symbol of division." Harold paused, glancing at James, who gave him an encouraging nod. "But now I want to reclaim that name," Harold continued. "This diner is going to stand for something new, something my mother would be proud of. It's going to be a place where everyone is welcome, where everyone has a seat at the table." The crowd cheered, and as the new sign for Rose's Diner was unveiled, it felt like a fitting tribute to the town's journey. As summer approached, Rachel Morales prepared to leave Hollow Creek once again, this time for good. Her work had taken her to other towns and cities, and while she had grown deeply attached to Hollow Creek, she knew it was time to move on. On her last night in town, she gathered with James, Emily, and the others at Rose's Diner for one final meal. The atmosphere was warm and nostalgic, filled with laughter and shared memories. "I'm going to miss this place," Rachel admitted as she sipped her coffee. "But I know you all are going to keep the momentum going." "Well, miss you too, Rachel," James said, smiling warmly. "But don't worry, we've got this." They spent the rest of the evening reminiscing about the town's journey, about how far they had come, and about the road that still lay ahead. When it was time to say goodbye, there were hugs, tears, and promises to keep in touch. But as Rachel drove away from Hollow Creek the next morning, she left knowing that the town was in good hands. Several months after Rachel's departure, James received a letter from her. He sat on his porch, the autumn air crisp and cool, as he read her words. "Dear James, I hope this letter finds you well. I've been thinking about Hollow Creek a lot lately, and I wanted to check in. I've been working with a community out west, and it reminds me so much of where Hollow Creek was when I first arrived. But seeing the progress we made gives me hope that change is possible, no matter where you are. I just wanted to thank you once again for everything you've done for the town and for me. You've taught me so much about patience, about perseverance, and about how change really happens. You'll never forget our time together. Take care of yourself, James, and take care of Hollow Creek. With gratitude, Rachel." James smiled as he folded the letter, tucking it into his pocket. Rachel's words were a reminder that their work was far from over, but it was also a reminder of how much they had already accomplished. Over time, Tommy Barnes fully embraced his role as a leader in the town's new direction. He became a regular volunteer at the community center, working with young people who, like him, had once been resistant to change. One afternoon, as Tommy sat on a bench outside the center, talking with a group of teenagers, he realized just how far he had come. The anger and fear that had once controlled him were gone, replaced by a sense of purpose. "I used to think change was something to be afraid of," Tommy told the teens. "But now I see it's what makes us better. We can't grow if we don't open ourselves up to new ways of thinking." The teens listened intently, nodding in agreement. Tommy's journey had become an inspiration to many, showing that it was never too late to change. 1 year after the March for Unity, the town of Hollow Creek came together once again to celebrate. The town square was filled with music, food, and laughter, as people from all walks of life gathered to reflect on the progress they had made. James stood with Sheriff Nate Johnson, Emily Green, and Lily Sanders, watching the festivities with a deep sense of pride. The town was thriving, its people united by a shared vision of a better future. As the sun set over the town, casting a golden glow over the square, James felt a quiet sense of contentment. Hollow Creek had been through so much, but they had come out the other side stronger, more resilient, and more united than ever. In the years that followed, Hollow Creek continued to evolve. The town's story became a beacon of hope for other communities struggling with their own divisions. People came from far and wide to visit Rose's Diner, to see the mural painted by the teenagers, and to meet the people who had made change possible. But for James, it wasn't about the recognition. It wasn't about being a hero or a leader. It was about the quiet, steady work of building a community where everyone had a place. As he sat on his porch one evening, watching the stars twinkle above the town, James felt a deep sense of peace. He knew that the fight for justice was ongoing, that there would always be more work to do. But for now, in this moment, he was content. Hollow Creek was his home, and it was a home worth fighting for. As the story of James and Hollow Creek shows, change takes courage, community, and a willingness to stand up for what's right. If you've been inspired by their journey, Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that remind us of the importance of unity, justice, and hope. And remember, your voice matters. Let us know in the comments how this story touched you and what kind of stories you'd love to hear next. Hit the bell icon so you never miss an update. It's still hard sometimes, but I feel like we're finally free. Edith smiled, her heart swelling with pride for Rachel. She had come so far, and though there were still challenges ahead, Edith knew that Rachel had the strength to face them. "I'm so proud of you," Edith said softly. "You're doing such a good job, Rachel. You and the girls are going to be just fine." Rachel hesitated for a moment, then her voice softened. "We couldn't have done it without you, Edith. You saved us. I'll never be able to thank you enough for everything you've done." Tears welled in Edith's eyes, and she wiped them away with a smile. "You're family now, Rachel, and family takes care of each other." As Edith hung up the phone, a sense of calm settled over her. She had faced her fears, stood up to Derek, and helped Rachel and the girls escape a dangerous situation. It hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. Her home, once a place of quiet solitude, had become a symbol of strength and resilience. And her neighbors' sons, strangers, had become a community, united by a shared sense of purpose. Life on Cedar Street would never be the same again, but that was okay. Because now it is filled with hope, connection, and the promise of a better future. Edith smiled as she stepped out into her garden, the late afternoon sun casting a warm glow over the roses. She knelt down, her hands gently tending to the flowers, feeling the cool earth beneath her fingertips. There was still work to be done, but now she knew she wasn't doing it alone. In the weeks that followed Derek's final confrontation, a new sense of peace settled over Cedar Street. The neighborhood watch remained vigilant, but the need for constant worry had lessened as Derek's presence faded from their lives. He hadn't returned, and the restraining order kept him at a safe distance from Edith's home and from the shelter where Rachel and the girls were living. Edith found herself breathing easier with each passing day, the weight of fear slowly lifting from her shoulders. One crisp autumn morning, as Edith was pruning her roses, she heard the familiar ring of her phone from inside the house. She wiped her hands on her gardening apron and hurried to answer it, her heart lifting when she saw Rachel's name on the caller ID. "Rachel, it's so good to hear from you," Edith said, a smile spreading across her face as she held the phone to her ear. "Hi, Edith," Rachel replied, her voice filled with warmth. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything." "Not at all, dear. Just tending to the garden. How are you and the girls doing?" Rachel let out a small sigh, though it was one of relief rather than stress. "We're doing really well, actually. The girls are starting to settle in at school, and they're making new friends. We've been staying at the shelter for a while now, but I've been working with a caseworker. And, well, we found a place. It's a small apartment, but it's ours." Edith's heart swelled with joy at the news. "Rachel, that's wonderful. I'm so happy for you. I couldn't have done it without your help, Edith. Really? I mean it. You were there for me when I didn't know what to do. I'll never be able to thank you enough." "You've already thanked me more than enough, Rachel," Edith said gently. "I'm just glad you and the girls are safe and moving forward." "We are," Rachel agreed, her voice steady. "We still have some hard days, but we're starting to rebuild. I'm learning how to live without looking over my shoulder all the time. The girls, they've been through so much, but I think they're going to be okay." Edith felt a tear slip down her cheek, and she wiped it away with a smile. "You're an incredible mother, Rachel. You've given them the chance to have a better life, and that's the most important thing." "Thank you," Rachel whispered, her voice filled with emotion. "I wanted to ask, would you like to come visit us when we're settled into the apartment? The girls miss you, and I'd love for you to see our new place." "I'd love that," Edith replied without hesitation. "I can't wait to see how far you've come." After they said their goodbyes, Edith stood in the quiet of her kitchen, a deep sense of pride and peace settling over her. She had been part of something important, helping Rachel and her daughters escape a dangerous situation and start a new life. Knowing that they were safe and thriving gave Edith a sense of fulfillment she hadn't felt in a long time. But Edith also knew that healing wasn't just for Rachel and the girls. She too had been deeply affected by everything that had happened. For so long, Edith had lived in a world of solitude, wrapped in the memories of her past life with Richard. But now she realized that she had the power to create new connections, to make a difference in the lives of others. Her small, quiet world had expanded in ways she never could have predicted. A few weeks later, Edith stood in front of the door to Rachel's new apartment, her heart racing with anticipation. She held a basket filled with homemade cookies and a small potted plant, a housewarming gift for Rachel and the girls. As she knocked on the door, she couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement and pride. Rachel had taken such brave steps toward building a new life for herself and her daughters, and Edith was eager to see the progress they had made. The door opened, and there stood Rachel, her face lighting up with a wide smile. "Edith, you made it." "Of course I did," Edith replied warmly, stepping inside and hugging Rachel. "I wouldn't miss this for the world." The apartment was small but cozy, filled with the warmth and light that Edith had come to associate with Rachel. The walls were adorned with colorful artwork, some drawn by Lily and Ivy, and the space felt alive with the energy of a family building something new. Edith smiled as she took it all in, her heart swelling with pride for Rachel's resilience. "Look who's here!" Rachel called out. And moments later, Lily and Ivy came bounding into the room, their faces bright with excitement. "Grandma Edith!" they exclaimed in unison, rushing toward her and wrapping their arms around her. Edith laughed, bending down to hug the girls. "Oh, my dears, it's so good to see you." "We missed you," Ivy said, her voice small but filled with warmth. "Can you stay for dinner?" "I wouldn't dream of leaving before dinner," Edith replied, her heart swelling with affection for the girls. As they settled into the living room, Rachel brought out a pot of tea, and the four of them spent the afternoon catching up, laughing, and sharing stories. The girls proudly showed Edith their artwork, and Rachel talked about how they were adjusting to their new school and making friends. "They're doing so well," Rachel said, her voice filled with relief and pride. "I wasn't sure how they would handle all the changes, but they've been so strong. I'm so proud of them." "You should be proud of yourself too," Edith said gently. "You've created a safe, loving home for them. That's everything." Rachel smiled, her eyes glistening with tears of gratitude. "I still can't believe we made it. There were times when I thought we'd never get out, but now we have a chance at a real life." As the afternoon turned into evening, the conversation grew deeper, and Edith and Rachel found themselves reflecting on everything that had happened over the past few months. There had been so much pain, fear, and uncertainty, but now there was also hope. They had made it through the storm, and now they were standing on the other side, ready to rebuild their lives. "I never thought I'd feel free," Rachel admitted quietly, her voice heavy with emotion. "But now I wake up every morning knowing that I'm safe, that my girls are safe. And that's everything." Edith reached out and took Rachel's hand, squeezing it gently. "You deserve this peace, Rachel. You and the girls deserve all the happiness in the world." Rachel nodded, her eyes filled with gratitude. "And you deserve it too, Edith. You've been through so much yourself. You've given us a new start, and I hope you know how much that means to me." Edith smiled, her heart full. "We've given each other a new start." Later that evening, after dinner, and one last round of hugs from Lily and Ivy, Edith said her goodbyes and made her way back to her own home. As she walked down the quiet street, she felt a deep sense of contentment. Life had changed in ways she never could have predicted, but it was better now, richer, fuller, and filled with new connections. Rachel and the girls had become like family to her, and Edith knew that their bond would only grow stronger as they continued to support one another in the days ahead. As the autumn leaves began to fall and the air turned crisp, Edith found herself spending more time in her garden, reflecting on the past few months. So much had changed, not just for Rachel and the girls, but for Edith as well. Her life, once quiet and isolated, had been transformed by the relationships she had built and the strength she had discovered within herself. But with that transformation came a deeper understanding of the weight she had been carrying for so long: grief, the loneliness, the sense of being left behind. Richard's death had left a hole in Edith's life, one that she had tried to fill with routine and solitude. But now, with Rachel and the girls in her life, Edith realized that she didn't have to carry that weight alone anymore. One afternoon, as Edith sat in the garden with a cup of tea, she found herself thinking about Richard. She missed him every day, missed his laugh, his warmth, the way he had always made her feel safe and loved. But for the first time in a long time, Edith felt a sense of peace when she thought of him, peace in knowing that he would have been proud of her for everything she had done to help Rachel and the girls. As she sipped her tea, Edith decided it was time to visit Richard's grave. She hadn't been in a while, and she felt a strong pull to go to tell him about everything that had happened, about the new life she had found after all these years. The next day, Edith drove to the cemetery where Richard was buried. The drive was quiet, the fall colors painting the landscape in shades of gold and red. When she arrived, Edith made her way to Richard's headstone, a small smile on her face as she placed a bouquet of fresh roses at his grave. "Hello, love," she said softly, her voice filled with affection. "It's been a while, but I've been busy. I have so much to tell you." For the next hour, Edith sat by Richard's grave, telling him about Rachel, about the girls, about everything that had happened since they had moved into the neighborhood. She talked about how she had found new strength within herself, how she had made new friends, and how she had learned that it was never too late to make a difference in someone's life. "I think you'd be proud of me," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I know I've still got a lot of life left to live, and I'm going to make the most of it. I'll carry your love with me, always." As Edith stood to leave, she felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. She knew that Richard was still with her, in spirit, and that his love would continue to guide her in the days ahead. She wasn't alone. Not anymore. As the winter holidays approached, Cedar Street came alive with the warm glow of twinkling lights and the festive spirit of the season. Edith, who had once dreaded the long, lonely winter months, now found herself filled with a sense of anticipation and joy. The neighborhood had changed so much in the past few months, and Edith felt more connected to her community than ever before. Rachel and the girls had invited Edith to spend Christmas with them in their new apartment, and Edith had gladly accepted. It was a far cry from the quiet, solitary holidays she had spent in years past, and she was looking forward to celebrating with people she cared about. On Christmas Eve, Edith arrived at Rachel's apartment with a basket full of gifts and homemade treats. The girls greeted her at the door, their faces bright with excitement, and Edith couldn't help but laugh as they pulled her inside. "We've been waiting for you," Lily exclaimed, her eyes sparkling with joy. Mom made hot chocolate. Edith's heart swelled with affection as she followed the girls into the cozy living room where Rachel was waiting with a warm smile. The apartment was decorated with twinkling lights and a small Christmas tree, and the air was filled with the comforting scent of cinnamon and pine. "Welcome, Edith," Rachel said, hugging her tightly. "We're so glad you're here." "I wouldn't want to be anywhere else," Edith replied, her voice full of warmth. As they sat together by the fire, sipping hot chocolate and exchanging stories, Edith felt a deep sense of contentment. This was what she had been missing for so long, a sense of connection, of belonging, of family. The evening passed in a blur of laughter, conversation, and warmth. The girls opened their presents with wide-eyed excitement, and Edith marveled at how far they had come since the dark days of living under Derek's control. They were happy, healthy, and full of life, and Edith knew that Rachel had done an incredible job of creating a safe, loving home for them. Later that night, after the girls had gone to bed, Rachel and Edith sat together by the fire, reflecting on everything that had happened over the past year. "It feels like a lifetime ago," Rachel said quietly, her eyes focused on the flickering flames. "Sometimes I still can't believe we made it out." "But we did." "You did," Edith corrected gently. "You found the strength to leave, and now you and the girls have a bright future ahead of you." Rachel smiled, her eyes glistening with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you, Edith. You were there when I needed someone the most, and I'll never forget that." Edith reached out and took Rachel's hand, squeezing it gently. "We've been there for each other, and we'll keep being there, no matter what comes next. As they sat together in the quiet of the night, Edith felt a deep sense of peace settling over her. The storm was over, and now it was time to move forward to embrace the future with open arms, knowing that they had all found the strength to survive and thrive. And in that moment, Edith knew that everything would be all right. Thank you for following along with Edith's emotional and inspiring journey. If you found this story moving or relatable, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on more powerful stories like this. We'll be bringing you more heartwarming tales of resilience, community, and the strength of the human spirit. And don't forget to click the notification bell so you'll always be the first to know when new content is available. We value your feedback, so if you enjoyed this story, leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for being part of our storytelling community, and stay tuned for more stories that remind us all that no matter how hard things get, we are never truly alone.